Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we are on to the playoffs, people. Not the fantasy football playoffs, the actual real-life playoffs. Long season, 17 weeks down, but we are still here breaking down everything you need to know. Quite just slightly different format, I should say, this week compared to some of our previous breakdowns because there's only 6 games. Want to get a little more in depth? Why not? So, Dwain McFarland, who you guys have heard before, we will be going through what each offense is best at, what each defense is worst at, and also DFS thoughts as well as a game prediction. So slightly different format, same great minds. Dwain, thanks for coming on again, man. Happy wildcard round.
Yeah, man, excited to be on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So with that, we will get right to it, everybody. We got the Colts at the Bills. First matchup on Saturday. Remember, 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday. Bills open as 7-point favorites, down slightly to 6.5. Game total 52.5, down to 51. So looking at the Colts, I mean, the offensive line is what really makes this offense run. It was PFF's number 1 ranked unit in the preseason, ultimately finished 3rd in both PFF team run blocking grade and pressure rate. What hurts, left tackle Anthony Costanzo has been done for the season since week 15 with an ankle injury. So, we've seen Jonathan Taylor and these guys come on strong. I'm not saying he won't keep it up. The guy has truly been playing much better football. It's not just the, weak schedule they've been going through. They've had the Jaguars, Steelers, tough matchup, but then Texans, Raiders, Texans since week 13. But truly, you look at Taylor's broken tackle numbers, I think he'll be fine, but just realize without Costanzo, they're not quite the same monster that we were seeing earlier in the year. Rivers, he's excellent at getting things right, but again, not quite at 100% like you would like your best unit on the offense to be. Dwain, what are the Bills trying to do on offense?
Yeah, man, the Bills want to pass and pass some more, amazingly, after what we, had seen the previous 2 years where they really tried to protect Josh Allen more. I mean, and give Josh Allen credit. I mean, the guy, I don't know about you, Ian. I've never seen anybody come this far, like since their rookie season and 2 seasons, like in their passing accuracy. I mean, it's pretty amazing, what Josh Allen's been able to do. So, I mean, they want to throw the ball. What's going to be really interesting, I think, in this game, Ian, is if you look at Josh Allen's splits, there's still a story that a lot of folks don't talk about, a lot, and that's really his man versus zone splits. So if you think about Josh, Allen's totals on the season, and this is taking all plays into consideration, even ones with penalties, it just gives us even a little bit bigger of a sample size. But he had 414 completions for 4,718 yards, 37 touchdowns, and 13 picks. 18 of those touchdowns and 3 of those picks came against man. But whenever you take away, the man coverage, and especially cover one, he's really, really good at beating cover one, especially with Stephon Diggs. That's his main guy whenever they're in man. Diggs's target rate shoots up to almost 40% anytime they're facing a cover one defense. So that's always great for Diggs. But if you look at those situations where, they're not in man and they're in zone. So here are his splits: 1,943 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 9 picks. Well, guess what the Colts really love to do? The Colts run the second most zone in the entire NFL. Now, they haven't been great down the stretch, right? They've had some teams really burn them. The Colts probably, if you look at the early season stats, they benefited from some pretty easy matchups. They were also healthier. They're a little bit banged up, across their defense right now. But that's going to be the interesting thing for me, is just looking and seeing, because they run a ton of cover 3, a ton of cover 3 seam. They even throw some cover 6 out there. So they don't mix it up as much as, like, say, the Rams do, who also run a ton of zone, but are probably, I would say, are the best zone team in the league. Actually, they're probably the best, passing defense in the league. Yeah. Heck, we might just say they're the best defense. We'll get to them in a minute. They're probably the best defense heading into the playoffs. But that's going to be the interesting thing for me. I want to see, because this year, for whatever reasons, teams just haven't forced Allen to face, a lot of zone. He's been able to, throw a lot against, man coverage. They added Stephon Diggs, so that was huge. So that's really what I'm looking for, Ian. I want to see, how does Josh Allen look against a zone defense that's pretty much what they're going to throw at him all day long.
Great points. And transitioning a little bit to how these defenses are going to be attacking the offenses, I will be, wild to see that, because Josh Allen, he should have time in this one, because the Colts are good at a lot of things, but pressure, creating havoc is one of those things that they struggle at a little bit more. Looking at, just their overall, just team chemistry this year and what they've been able to do. Look, they have 2 fantastic players. Darius Leonard, PFF's number 8 highest graded linebacker, and defensive tackle DeForest Buckner, our number 3 rated interior defender. But man, they're just missing that one great pass rusher. I mean, they're only 21st in pressure pressure rate. Seahawks, Packers, Titans are the only worst playoff teams. And again, Josh Allen, he holds the ball and it usually works out just fine. I mean, truly, this guy will come to a complete standstill in the pocket sometimes. It's honestly wild to watch. 23 passing touchdowns when taking at least 2.5 seconds to throw, tied with Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. It's not necessarily a bad thing when Josh Allen holds the ball. He's able to get away. And the Colts, I'm not sure if they do have defensive firepower to completely wreak havoc and get in the backfield. So that's going to be the story of the game, I feel like, because the Bills, to your point, they don't like to run the ball. They're probably not going to be able to have much success running the ball against this Colts front anyway. Can Josh Allen overcome his zone splits with probably having enough time to throw? So if the offensive line doesn't hold up, that's when we're really going to be in trouble. Because again, Colts defense good at a lot of things, getting after the quarterback, not so much. Dwain, where do you think this Colts defense Colts offense, might look to attack Buffalo?
Yeah, I think, if I'm looking at the Colts offense, coming at Buffalo, I think Buffalo, they're decent at both spots, but they're not great, so, I mean, I think if I'm the Colts, I'm going to come out and try to run the ball. I'm not going to worry about really where the strength is. I think whenever the Colts set up the running game and they get their play action going, that's when they're the most dangerous. And you already covered, the fact that Costanzo's out. But if you look at what they did last week, with Taylor, now that was against, a Civ defense, in the Jaguars, with Taylor hitting over 200 yards. But I think that's going to be the key. They don't want to just sit back there. They don't want to be in a situation where, it's predictable, right, that Rivers is going to throw all the time. Now, the Colts, obviously, they throw more than they run, but they really just want to set up the play action pass. That opens up some of the things down the field because the Bills secondary is good, right? You're probably going to have Tre'Davious White, we don't know that he'll shadow, but he's going to see plenty of T.Y. Hilton, who has been a threat down the stretch, who has been able to score some touchdowns. He's been able to make some big plays. So expect to see plenty, of Tre'Davious White on, T.Y. Hilton. So I think from that standpoint, you're going to have to look at the other elements, of your offense. Zach Pascal has come through lately. Michael Pittman has come through lately. Pittman, not so much here over the last few weeks, but, they've got, they're really more of a committee offense anyway, right? They spread the ball around a ton, and I think that'll work out, for them against the Bills. I expect this to be a high-scoring game, that's set at 52 points, I believe, with Buffalo favored by 6.5. Like if I had to bet something, on this, like I don't feel real great about any of these games. Like, in the regular season, it's easier to find games that you like to pick. But I mean, I'm betting Indy to cover, but I think that the over is probably in play.
Yeah, this one certainly looks like the matchup between, this one or Ravens Titans, one of these two. You got offense on both sides of the ball that can really instill their will. Only issue would be, can Buffalo run the ball? But again, they don't even try to do it that often anyway. So I think they will be fine. Some quick DFS notes. I'm going to cover the Colts here. So looking at these running backs, Jonathan Taylor's at 7,900, Nyheim Hines is at 4,700. I am not against potentially fading Jonathan Taylor here because I know the Bills have a quote unquote bad run defense, but you look at some of these games where they've really been teed off on, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, namely, and the Bills, they're just one of these teams that they're so smart in everything they do, offense and defense. They understand what they should be doing in the year 2020, and that is devoting extra resources to your pass defense. So yes, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they could not slow him down because they were trying to take the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands. So I just think that, looking at Jonathan Taylor in this run game, that is the focus. That's who they're trying to stop. I would not be shocked if we actually see Nyheim Hines potentially featured a little bit more than we're expecting. This year, the Colts had the 5th best offense in yards per attempt, 2 targets out of the backfield. Bills are surrendering the 3rd highest yards per attempt, 2 targets lined up in the backfield. So, only the Broncos and Rams have faced fewer run plays with A+ defenders in the box than the Bills. They have usually invited teams to run the ball on them. I think that's been a conscious choice. And I think when they face an offense like the Colts, who are going to be trying to bang the rock, we're going to see them put more defenders in there to try to slow that down. So I think, sometimes these bad run defenses are a little bit overstated. I think that's what we have with the Bills. They've been playing better overall recently. Look, I think old man Rivers, he's good enough to get them whatever the defense wants them to do. Would not be shocked if we see more of a pass-happy approach after the Bills declare that they are finally going to try to take away their run. So, if you want to fade off Jonathan Taylor, I think David Montgomery gives you a similar touch count, tougher matchup. Nyheim Hines is much cheaper. Just saying, you try and go on one of these GPPs, weird things can happen. It still isn't completely the Jonathan Taylor show. Hines, particularly if the Bills are able to build a lead, will be very involved. Dwain, what are you looking at early in the week with the Bills?
Yeah, man. I mean, as far as the Bills go, the running game is really hard to even look at. It's like you said, they don't run the ball a ton, and then they split it up. between the two guys. Singletary gets a little bit more of the passing work. You're going to see more of Zach Moss on the running plays. Zach Moss does get the carries inside the 5. So if you're looking for like a cheap touchdown, out of a running back, I'm looking at DraftKings right now. So for the Bills, they've got Moss at 4,600. They've got Singletary at 4,300. I mean, those don't get you, super excited though, whenever you think about some of the other running backs that are on the slate. So, I mean, obviously you're looking at Stephon Diggs. You're gonna have to keep an eye, he's questionable right now with an oblique. He was questionable the week before, where he got dinged at the end of week 16. So just keep an eye on Diggs on the injury report. But if they're playing a ton of zone, that does bring down, typically in those games, Diggs hasn't played as well as he has whenever he's faced a lot of man, which makes sense, right? We just talked about how well Josh Allen had done against man, especially cover 1, and how often he went to Diggs. Against zone, they spread the ball around a little bit more, and they haven't scored as many touchdowns. So again, this is not me saying don't play Diggs, but just, keep it within reason. I don't think, we're going to see some of these games like we have here recently, where he's getting 10, 11, and 12 receptions, and having a chance at 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think he could still get to 8 or 9 catches, and get to 100 yards, but I think you're going to be, lucky if you get a touchdown plus that with Diggs. I mean, obviously he's going to be one of the best players on the field, but just, again, it kind of goes back to where we were with, with Allen, and what he's had with zone. I mean, kind of think back to those splits again, and the Colts are going to have to, they'll play some man coverage, right? So basically it's one of those deals where people don't realize like how small the margins are on these things of you getting something right for DFS versus getting something wrong. So say they don't run cover 1 really that often. Like they run cover 1, less than most of the teams in all the NFL. But if Josh Allen drops back on one of those plays and happens to see Diggs, right, has the matchup he wants, that's all it takes is that one play, right? And then all of a sudden, I look like an idiot. It's go, oh man, McFarland said don't play him because of all the zone. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, well, one of the 3 plays they ran cover 1, he torched his corner. So again, don't be completely afraid of Diggs, but I would just put a little bit of a cap on his expectations. If you're playing the 3-game slate on Saturday, it's he's the highest price receiver, on the slate, and deservedly so. It's going to be tough though. And I know we'll get to the rest of the teams later, but there's a lot of tough matchups, right? You're going to talk about Seattle here versus, the Rams, corners and secondary. You're going to talk about Tampa Bay here in a minute against Washington. Tampa Bay's even got some decent players, in the secondary. So if you're playing the 3-game slate, it's probably going to be hard to get away from Diggs, but I think it is a way that you could say, I'm going to get contrarian because he's probably going to be in 60 to 70% of lineups, I would guess, and that is a way that you could get, away from being, just chalk completely. And I think there is some rationale to it. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to happen, but there is a good thought process behind it.
Yeah, one guy we haven't talked about is Cole Beasley, who did not practice on Tuesday with a knee injury, which puts him on the wrong side of questionable. You take away Josh Allen's safety valve against a tougher scheme defense than he's used to playing. I think losing Cole Beasley is going to be worse for Stephon Diggs, whereas if he could just be out there, take away a little bit of attention. So that takes us to the game predictions. And you already kind of spoiled yours a little bit, Dwayne, but I'm right there with you, man. I think 6.5 points for Indy is far too many. I'm going ahead and take the Colts. I think the Bills will advance and will win this game, but their defense is good, but I think we've seen enough efficiency from both this Colts run game and the pass game. I think they're going to be able to move the ball regardless of where the Bills want to try to stack their chips. And yeah, the Colts are going to make it tough to run against the Bills, but you know what? Josh Allen, zone man, whatever, we've seen enough from this guy throughout the year that, I just think he can put it together enough to come away with the win. But man, it's going to be tough. I like a lot of these underdogs this week. I'm curious to see where we both end up on that, but you're going with Colts 6.5 as well.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. I think the Bills are going to win the game. I'd put them in the 65-35 range to win the game. I just think 6.5 is too much given the splits with Allen against, the zone coverage, which is not something that just is this year, right? That goes back a couple of years, so despite all the improvements Allen has made, which he's made a ton, right? And he's looked really good. I think this is one last hurdle that he's got to get over. And I just think that the Colts have been good on offense as well. And like you said, going with Jonathan Taylor and just the things he's been able to do, they're just able to bring balance, and so I think that makes it tough, against the opposing defense. So I think 6.5 is just too much.
Moving on to the Saturday afternoon game, we got the Rams at the Seahawks. Seattle is 4-point favorites. Game total 42.5 up to 43. So looking at this Rams offense, we're not sure if it's going to be Wolford or Jared Goff. Earlier reports on Monday were indicating that it's going to be really tough for Goff to play. We did see him come out, get a limited practice on Saturday with a thumb injury, but we'll see what happens. Hey, if he's out of the picture, John Wolford at least looked competent enough in that game last week. I've already had a lot of people in the mentions saying, oh, could the Rams be better off without Goff? Chill out. We still have not seen Wolford actually lead a touchdown drive. Don't forget, the Rams got that Troy Hill pick 6 last week to find the end zone. So I wouldn't go quite that far. I would just say, it could help them, to have a scrambling threat under center, because we have seen Goff just have some of these games where we cannot move the ball at all. And hey, I think Wolford in a run first attack can be okay in this offense, because don't look now, but pretty much the best part of this Rams offense all year has been their offensive line, which is shocking to me, because this O-line 2017, 2018 carried this team. Todd Gurley, CJ Anderson, didn't matter. They were putting up historic numbers in terms of how good they were. Now they might be getting Andrew Whitworth back. Even though they didn't address the position last offseason, which is why I was pretty off on the Rams as a whole this year, guess what? It didn't matter, because Sean McVay is so much smarter than any of us or you listeners out there will ever be about football. So good for them. They'd end the year 6th ranked offensive line yards before contact per attempt, even though they were cycling through running backs, quarterback issues, didn't have a field stretcher. Didn't matter. They got the job done. 13th in pressure rate, even though Goff was a below average time to throw. Look, man, I did not see this offensive line being this good, but credit to the coaching staff, credit to those offensive linemen for getting the job done. And they're going to need to lean on that group to have any success against the Seahawks. Because even if Wolford is a slight, if you want to go that far, which I would not, but if you want to say Wolford is better, for business being back there, come on, it's going to be a run first attack. You're going to need to lean on those big uglies. So I know we've, talked about the Seahawks secondary all year being their issue. I still think for the Rams to win this game on offense, they're going to need to control the line of scrimmage, and they might just have the big uglies to do it. Dwayne, it's been a tale of 2 seasons for the Seahawks offense. Came in looking like, I'll let Russ cook and things are going great. Hasn't been so hot lately, though. What are you expecting going the wild card round?
Yeah, so I really dug into this just for the show, because it's something I'd been thinking about anyway all season, and I hadn't had time. And so I had 2 major questions on my mind. One, how did Josh Allen improve so much? And number 2, what happened in the tale of 2 seasons for Seattle? And you gave me those 2 teams right off the bat, so I appreciate that. You gave me a reason to go dig in. But as far as the Seahawks, here's what I was able to find. So early in the season, the opposing teams were using a lot of press coverage. And that was really going the Seahawks' way. So if you look at Metcalf, in the first 9 games, 351 routes, 152 of those were against press. He was targeted 66 times. He had 54 receptions for 619 yards, 8 touchdowns. If you look at the second 8 games, right, the press coverage dropped from 152 down to 90. His target stayed the same, 65 versus 66, but the bigger plays were not quite there. 41 receptions, 556 yards, and only 2 touchdowns. So I think that's a big thing for Metcalf. Teams have learned that, okay, so what are we going to do? They're going to back off of him. They're not going to challenge him up at the line. The other thing they're doing is they're blitzing less. And because Russ has actually been pretty good against the blitz, so they're blitzing less. They're using more coverage. They're playing off. And so far, the Seahawks just haven't had an answer for it. So if you look at Lockett, very similar. The first 9 games, 354 routes, 117 of those against press. In the second 8 games, 308 routes, only 58 of those against press. And you saw a very similar drop from 619 yards down to 439, 7 touchdowns down to 3 touchdowns. So teams have figured out that, look, they've got 2 weapons. Really. They don't have a third weapon in the passing game. We can say Greg Olsen, but we don't know when's Greg Olsen. Is he ever going to be healthy? Is he really the same? They just don't have that third option to demand, right, certain types of looks from the defense, which means defenses are basically saying, okay, we're just going to stay back. We're not going to let you make big plays. We know that you've got offensive line deficiencies. Yes, Russell Wilson's really good, but we're just continue to make him make plays and just slowly move the ball down the field. We're not going to give up the big play to the Seahawks. And that's really worked. And so they just haven't had an answer for it. Historically, Ian, what we may have seen, which is kind of interesting, right? They ran the ball all the time, really. And I know this is wrong, but they, their mantra was, we'll run the ball to set up the pass, right? but they may need to do some of that. It's almost like they need to get their play action game going even better. They do run play action. They could run it more though, easily with their team. They could rank first in the league, right? If they wanted to, they could run play action 35-40%, of their passing plays and be fine. And so I think that's the thing that they could think about, using a little bit more of the play action pass, maybe running the ball just a little bit more. This isn't necessarily the best matchup for that, either. But I think that's going to be the key. And here's the biggest issue for the Seahawks this year. If you look at the Rams, right, and the way, I know I'm probably jumping ahead to my matchup part, but if you look at the way the Rams really play opposing offenses, they don't really use a ton of press coverage. They play off and they mix things up big time. So if you look at Russell Wilson, in the first half of the season, hang on, let me pull this up because this is pretty cool. If you look at Russell Wilson, in the first half of the season, and you look at how he was able to do, against, cover 3, cover 1, he really torched both of those coverages. But whenever you were really able to mix things up, throw some cover 2 at him, throw some cover 6 at him, throw some cover 4, and a lot of times that's cover 4 match, which has man and zone qualities to that coverage. Teams that were able to mix things up against Russ really did do better. And if you look at what the Rams have been able to do this year, so cover 3, 166, of their drop of their plays, 93, cover 3 seam, quarters 149, cover 6 114, cover 1 72. So really, if you look at their defense, like they mix it up as well as anyone in the way they play their coverages. So it's not easy to drop back and identify what they're going to do. Most teams will have a staple, right? They'll either be a base cover 3, a base cover 1, that kind of a thing. You don't see base cover 2 or anything like that anymore. But really, the Rams are the team that I saw, because I really looked at all of them after I found this today. Like no team really mixes it up better. So I think Russ is in for some problems, because the recipe that's been there to stop that passing attack over the second half of the season is the exact recipe that the Rams use. And in fact, the Rams were one of the first teams to really expose Seattle earlier in the season. And a lot of teams were able to copy that.
Very good stuff, man. Look, you can find it on PFF.com. I did a article today. Who is the most complete 2020 NFL playoff team? Basically said, if we just treat the passing game, which we all know is like the most important quality of a team, specifically the quarterback, but if we treated that equal with the run game, with the O-line, receivers, pass defense, run defense, who pops up because of this and because of some poor kind of social branding. I've had Bills Mafia extremely angry at me ranking them 11th all throughout the day. But the purpose of this study for myself was to try to go through every offense and defense, see where teams are in the cracks, good and bad and all that. And the Rams defense, I literally can't find a weakness. The one that was seemingly popping up a little bit, they ranked sixth in tackling when I averaged out a few metrics, but that's because they were 24th in yards after the catch per reception allowed. But that's probably just because they have the second lowest average target depth against, because guys need to get the ball out quickly before Aaron Donald kills them. So truly, man, I don't know where there's a weakness. Even their run D, they're top 6 in all 4 categories I looked at. But to your point, the secondaries was truly such a big problem. First in PFF coverage grade, first in the EPA allowed per pass, yards per attempt, explosive pass play rate. This is the 11th best defense in terms of just EPA allowed per pass play since 2010. We're talking legit elite in all sense of the world, man, of the word, man, not throwing that around. So yeah, I'm looking at this and, you would think, hey, maybe Chris Carson, Russell Wilson could get going. I don't think so, man. Unfortunately, as you were explaining, kind of with the 2 versions of the Seahawks offense, I think they've gotten it in their mind that they can be, this running team and win with defense because of this just really, really soft schedule they've been facing. I mean, okay, they had a game in week 11 against the Cardinals. Since then, they have faced the Eagles, the Giants, the Jets, the Washington football team, the Rams, and then the CJ Beathard-led 49ers. Like, hey, you know what? They won 5 of those 6 games. A win is a win is a win. But I think this defensive turnaround being quite a bit overstated because of the quality of competition they've been facing lately. So it's concerning because I don't think this current state of the Seahawks offense quite has what it takes to get going against this Rams defense. Because again, I don't know really who can, unless you're firing on all cylinders, because the Rams defense, ooh, buddy, right. I think it's between them and the Saints. If we really had to line up who's playing the best right now. And I think it is the Rams as the best defense remaining in the playoffs. So good luck, Russ. I am not sure how you're going to crack that code. I'm excited to find out, though. Dwain, what do you think about Goff, Wolford, whoever's under center? How do you see McVay attacking the Seahawks defense?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. Either you're going to have Goff, who's going to be playing with an injury, right, or you're going to have a young, unproven quarterback. And McVay has shown, throughout this season that he's very willing to go to, a run heavy type scheme. And when we say run heavy, that would basically be like 50%, of your plays, right? And so I think they are going to lean on the run. They're going to try to set up play action. They know that their defense matches up really well with what the Seattle, Seahawks do on offense. So I think that's going to be their first plan, right? Is to try to run the ball, use play action, pick their spots to get the ball down the field. I would rather see Goff, personally, me. I know Goff isn't great, but it's not like, Seattle, their ability to rush the passer is average, right? It's not something where they're going to, cause a ton of pressure, on Goff. They're pretty good, but if the Rams can stay balanced and the Seahawks have to continue to respect the fact that it could be a run play on any play, especially the way this offense is designed, with all of the wide zone and inside zone and the boot actions, all those things off of it really requires offenses to have to really think about the run first and keep gap integrity and then go rush the passer versus some teams that are really good passing teams. You pretty much know, like, they're going to throw the ball most of the time. And so it's not that you don't have to have the discipline as a player that you would, against, these teams, but it's not quite as important. And it's so the defensive players can get away with occasionally just saying, I'm just going after the passer on this play. I don't care, if it ends up being a run. I'm betting on pass. It's tough to do that against the Rams, just like it's tough to do that against, Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. It's tough to do that against the Cleveland Browns. It's tough to do that against the Minnesota Vikings. They all run that same kind of offense where you really have to have that gap integrity. So I think that's what they'll try to do. They do need to be able to hit some shots deep though, Ian, because that's really where you can hit, the 49ers. And that's where I still think Goff gives you the better chance, assuming that the finger's well enough, right, to be able to have accuracy on his throws. We'll have to see, because the Seahawks are ripe for the taking, as far as the plays over 20 plus yards. They're one of the worst in the NFL. They're not good at play action. They're not good versus play action. So I think you could see like Josh Reynolds pop up, right, with one of those games where he only has 3 receptions, but he catches 2 for 50 yards and he gets you a touchdown, that kind of a thing. So I think you're going to be running the ball, but you got to be able to hit them deep. And typically that's where they use Reynolds. They use Wood some there. Kupp is mostly underneath. I haven't even looked at the injury report on Kupp yet, as to see, is he going to be back for this game? I know he's.
It sounds like it's trending up. He's gonna. He got practice Tuesday. He's returning Wednesday.
Okay, yeah, I had looked at the injury report, but I didn't see a COVID update on him. Okay, cool.
But yeah, looking on to the Rams now, I'm with you. It's not that Goff is like bad, but he's so bad under pressure, and he's actually pretty great when he's kept clean. And because we see, this kind of Jekyll and Hyde version of him, I think that causes us to, freak out when we do see the really bad version. Because this year, only Drew Lock had a larger drop off in yards per attempt under pressure versus kept clean. So I get it. I mean, he truly puts some horrendous film out there. Just realize if they can't keep him upright, he can certainly take advantage of this secondary. So adding Cooper Kupp back in this equation, we would expect Van Jefferson to kind of fall out of this 3 wide receiver set. So that would make Josh Reynolds at 3,600 on DraftKings, certainly a viable salary saving option. If Goff remains sidelined, we can go back to the well with John Wolford. I don't know why his price didn't change. He's still 4,900. The guy rushed 6 times for 56 yards last week. We need dual threat QBs. And hey, he at least looked like he should be out there. Again, no offensive touchdowns. I'm not, saying he's a better option than Goff to win this game. But in terms of fantasy land at that price point for a dual threat QB, yeah, that's fine. If you want to go stars and scrubs and pay up elsewhere, you can live with John Wolford under center with a Reynolds, Robert Wood stack, however you want to do it. But the one guy I think needs to be in more lineups than that is Cam Akers. 25 touches last week on a 66% snap rate. We were concerned if he was even going to be able to play through the ankle injury. Not only did he play, worked well ahead of Malcolm Brown. So Darrell Henderson still out of the picture, and Cam Akers sitting there at only 5,100. You'd have to go all the way up to David Montgomery or Nick Chubb in the high 6K to even find someone with a similar touch projection. So Akers, it's going to be hard to keep him out of lineups because I think if you just look at, your salary implied total in terms of your raw projection, you won't see another running back just implied for more points than what DraftKings is saying they should be. So Cam Akers, I'm fine going contrarian with the passing game if Goff is back. Otherwise, we'll kind of rein in expectations and just look at this run game and try to save some salary otherwise. Dwayne, Russell Wilson, the Seahawks, are you trusting them at all to put up points, or are you just kind of maybe looking at other spots for DFS?
Man, I think it's just tough. I mean, if you look at Wilson, week 10 against the Rams had 248 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks. Week 16, 225 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. It's just it's hard to get excited. At least, from a receiver standpoint, we're not seeing Metcalf, priced up in like the high 7,000, and even low 8,000 range that he got up to, briefly. So he's sitting at 6,700. The guy can still come through with a big play. DK Metcalf is a monster. It's just that the Rams are they're the worst possible matchup that the Seahawks could have ever thought of, right? For the way that they want to play their offense. The Rams would be a bad matchup for anybody, but if you look specifically at, what happened to the Seahawks offense in the second half of the season, the Rams do everything that they don't want to see. They do all of the things that cause their offense to plummet. So I think from a price standpoint, you can still get Metcalf at 6,700. Lockett's a little bit more at 6,900. But if I was placing a bet on one of those two, I'm probably still going to put it, on DK Metcalf. Even though the matchup is not great. The thing is, if you're playing the 3-game slate, you're going to have to find receivers somewhere, right? Where are the good matchups on this slate? It's tough, to really say where they are. And it's obvious, like we're in the playoffs, right? You got better defenses, you got better offenses across the board. So it's not like I'm not going to stack this game up. If I'm looking at just playing a Saturday slate, I think the game that we talked about first is the game you stack more, right? Indy and Buffalo. And then you just got to pick your spots with these other two matchups.
Yeah. Good stuff there. And that takes us to the game prediction. I am taking under 43. It's already a low game total. I get it, but just look at since this December. I'm talking total points from these two teams in their games. So for the Seahawks, they've combined to score 29 points, 43, 35, 29, 49. The Rams, 66, and then 27, 43, 29, 25. So in 10 games between these two teams in December, they have gotten to more than 43 just twice. So it's a low game total. I get it. Again, Wolford scored 9 freaking points without defensive help. Jared Goff scored 9 points against his defense in their last matchup. Russ, to your point, has had the 2 bad games this year. And even going back to last year, he had a 12-point stinker after they got Ramsey later in the season. So, life's too short to not bet the over. I get the moniker, but, gun to my head here, I got to give you all a prediction. I am taking the under. Dwain, are you going to be soft like me, or you got something better for the people?
Dude, I just don't see a reason to not take the under, especially if Wolford plays. I don't see a reason, to bet the over. I do think that the Rams cover just because of all the things that we talked about. I think right now they're sitting at Seattle minus 4.5. So I think the Rams are going to cover that, and I'm with you on the under. I know the under is already pretty low, but I don't see this team. I don't see these two teams being able to do a lot just with the way that all the matchups work.
Yeah, would not be shocked if that creeps closer to 40 by Saturday. Saturday night game up next. We got the Buccaneers at the Washington football team. Tampa opened as 7.5-point favorites. That's up to 8.5. Game total 46.5 down to 45. So looking at this Buccaneers offense, really looking back, I know he got a nice little cozy 3-game stretch run to end the year, but what a season for Tom Brady in a year that a lot of people were writing him off after that 2019 Patriots offense looked like a hot pile of garbage. As we saw, with hindsight now, it was more of an issue of the surrounding parts than Tom Brady, because my goodness, career high 45 big time throws with an average target depth of 10.1. He's never throw downfield more often. We've been telling you all season on this podcast to throw an apple or something at your friends that say he has a noodle arm. It just has not been the case all season long. 1,233 deep passing yards, most he has ever had in a season. And guess what? TB12 also had a league low 1.8% turnover worthy play rate. Guy's been throwing downfield more than ever, and he's been having success doing it. We'll get into matches a little bit more, but I will say the only concerning thing about Brady in this offense, he never exactly fixed that short passing game. We saw this rearing its ugly head throughout the year. He didn't have, a running back he could rely on. He didn't have, Chris Godwin's an awesome slot receiver. I get that. But we never saw a situation where they were just able to consistently get going, just in the short game. And I mentioned earlier about, Jared Goff being the second most just kind of pressure sensitive quarterback in terms of yards per attempt difference when he's pressure versus kept clean. Look, these are the only, only 7 quarterbacks had a difference of at least 3 yards in this metric. Drew Lock, Jared Goff, Nick Mullins, Tannehill, Mayfield, Burrow, and Tom Brady. I'm a little bit concerned with how he can stand up if this Washington football team defensive line does what it's done all year, and that is make life a living hell for the opposing quarterback. So I understand Brady, pretty great for the whole season, particularly the last 3 games. But in those last 3 games, again, against the Falcons and Lions, I'm just not sure we saw them fix some of the underlying problems they had earlier on. Hey, when he has time to throw that deep ball, Evans, AB, Godwin, he makes it work. But again, when things haven't gone great, we've seen this offense really sputter out. I'm not totally convinced that they have fixed all those problems, but Dwain, I'm leading you in here. Football team offense might not exactly have the firepower to make this any of an issue.
Yeah, man. I mean, they get Alex Smith back, last week, but we know, and this is no disrespect. I mean, the comeback that Alex Smith has made is awesome, but he's really a game manager. But I think ultimately their team is okay with that. I mean, if they really want to lean on the defense, if we talk about how does Washington win this game, right? They need to pressure Brady. They've got to cause some turnovers. They've got to get the game set up where they don't have to lean 100. They don't have to lean too heavily in, to their passing game. Washington, yes, they throw the ball 64% of the time. They only run the ball 36% of the time. But to really, they don't want to be in a shootout, right, with the Bucs. That's not the way that they're going to win this game. So I see them wanting to come out and run the ball. They're just going to have to keep it close. The problem is, you look at the Bucs; they are 8.5-point favorites, which that's a really big number for a playoff game. And I do get concerned, like if they fall behind, it really takes away some of the balance I think they need for Alex Smith. You saw Antonio Gibson, even though he's been battling a toe injury over the last 2 weeks, he's gotten back in the lineup. Last week, he had 19 carries. I think they really want to lean, on the running game, but the Bucs are really good, against the rush. So, I mean, if you think about it, what Washington probably wants to do, the Bucs are number 1 in the league in yards per game allowed, rushing 80.6 yards per game. So I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I think the defense is going to have to play really well. If the Bucs come out right and jump out to a 10-point lead or a 14-point lead, anything like that, I mean, the game's over, really, because then at that point, the Bucs can slow things down. They know that Washington doesn't have the offense to come back, so they can take less risk, worry less about turning the ball over, because they know that Washington's got an insane pass rush. It's the fifth best in the NFL from a PFF grading standpoint. From a pressure rate standpoint, it ranks even higher. So they want to stay away from the pass rush, but the Bucs, they score through throwing, right? So what Washington has to hope for is that early in the game they get a strip sack, right, type of thing against Brady while the Bucs are trying to build their lead.
Yeah, and staying on this topic against the Buccaneers defense, man, haven't been great recently. 27 plus points allowed in 5 of their last 7 games. And this was a unit after the first month and a half of the year. We were wondering if they were the best defense in the entire league. And I think a big part about that was kind of this fraudulent run defense. You mentioned them being good against the run. They are. They're great against the run. They've shut it down all year long. Part of that reason is because they're 29th in having, the most 8-man boxes against run plays. So great job with it. And that's because they devote so many resources to stopping that. So when someone like the Saints,
good news is I don't see Washington forcing them to change that, just because Alex Smith does not push the ball deep, right? We know he wants to check down underneath. You get Terry McLaurin back last week, yet his average depth of target is like a 6. So when you have those types of things, you're just not going to force the Bucs to play a kind of game they don't want to play. And I think that's going to be Washington's problem.
Yeah, man, I don't see them forcing the Buccaneers to try to do anything else. So we see Carlton Davis have problems with Tyreek Hill, have problems with Calvin Ridley. Terry McLaurin at full health, maybe he could do that. I'm not sure right now, and I'm definitely not sure with Alex Smith there, trying to check the ball down more times than not. So yeah, man, the Buccaneers' weaknesses, certainly not something I think the Washington football team can attack. Now, on the other side of the coin, Dwain, I've talked about, not being all that confident in Tom Brady against this defensive front. I still have concerns about this, shorter passing game. What do you think the Buccaneers are going to be able to do against this Washington football team defense?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for them. I think they're going to need to be more balanced, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, good offenses beat good defenses, right? Especially if you've got an offense, on the other side in Washington that can't force some sort of a situation where all of a sudden they're ahead by 10 or 14 points, right? And now they've got the Bucs playing from behind, and Brady has to drop back to pass pretty much every single time. If the Bucs find themselves in that situation, it's going to be a really long day, and we could see an upset by Washington. I think the issue really is going to be, even though this is such a good, pass defense, they have such a good pass rush. We just know that in the end, offense beats defense, right? And I don't think they're going to have to be that much better just because Washington's offense is so bad. And so I think you're going to see definitely, we're going to see less scoring, from the Bucs, most likely this week, unless they happen to hit some blown coverages, big plays, stuff like that. I see Tom Brady, really having to earn it, this week. I see more quick passing, from Brady, less shots downfield, unless they just really present themselves. So I think we're going to see overall the offense from the Bucs suppressed by, Washington, which they've been able to do to most other offenses. I just think that the Bucs are going to be able to still throw the ball enough. I would say you're not going to see it be a game where they're going to drop back 70% of the time, because I just don't see them trailing. Right. So I think if they can get into a situation where they can run the ball more, say they're up by 7, they're up by 10, I think you're going to see a much more balanced approach, like in the second half of the game, just because they want to avoid a turnover that could turn the game around. And then B, you also don't want to get Brady hurt heading into the week after.
Everything is lining up for DFS Rojo season, man. I like it. Look, 5 times this year, Buccaneers have scored 24 or fewer points. Rams, Chiefs, Saints twice, and the Bears. Those are all top 12 defenses in pressure. Washington football team, of course, is that. I don't think they need more than 24 points to win this game. They might not need more than 10 points to win this game, because I think Ronald Jones will be the guy. Look, he's dealing with the finger problem, but he at least got back into action last week, played more than Leonard Fournette. You look at the pricing disparity. They really haven't adjusted for, the potential for Ronald Jones to just get back to being that feature back that he was for basically 1 week before getting COVID, getting the finger injury. So, as Dan Fouts once said, last game of the year, can't hold anything back now. 5,500 Rojo, Fournette 4,500. I know Fournette was a pass down back last week, but I think we're underestimating the potential for Rojo to just really get fed, as much as possible. So yeah, I don't see Washington hold on to the ball, giving Tampa Bay a lot of possessions. They don't probably throw the ball. Got to give the ball to Ronald Jones. So Ronald Jones is going to be one of my probably highest owned running backs in tournaments, but I understand trying to focus on that Indy Buffalo game. Dwayne, anyone on Washington? McKissick, maybe?
Yeah, you actually nailed it. Like McKissick would be the guy. If you just look at the games where Washington has trailed by 4 or more points, we've got a line, of 8.5 here. 55% of the plays McKissick has been, and this is excluding the games where Gibson didn't play. So if you look at the games where both guys were active, 55% of the snaps went to McKissick when they trailed by 4 or more. And he also got 61% of the routes. So I think it's one of those days where you see, Washington down by 7, 10 points, and you're going to see a ton of checkdowns from Alex Smith to JD McKissick. And I say just checkdowns, but he has a decent route tree, right? He can be used in a lot of ways. And so I could see this easily being one of those 10, 11, 12 target games for McKissick, where he comes through for you with 8 or 9 receptions. That would be the way I would lean with Washington. Terry McLaurin, man, at 6,300, that's pretty cheap for a guy that can be the centerpiece. We just don't know how healthy he is, right? Was he just trying to gut it out last week and played because they really needed to win that game? Like we said before, his average depth of target really wasn't that great, but it is tough to just completely ignore Terry McLaurin in a situation where he's going to see one-on-one man coverage, but then you think, oh crap, well, I got Alex Smith. Can he push the ball down the field? Alex Smith, only 3.46% of his passes would grade out as big time throws, which is really low. It's one of the worst in the league. So he's just not a guy that pushes the ball down the field. He's just not a guy that's looking to take a lot of chances. And they need to do it early, Ian, if they're going to do it, right? You don't want to get behind and then the Bucs are expecting pass and then you try to do it because that's going to equal, a pick for the Bucs. If they can come out and do it early, I think McLaurin, if he hits a big play early, that's where a lot of your points come from.
And he was limited last week, but he still gutted out 81% snaps, 7 catches, 40 yards, and a score and 8 targets. So whether or not he's 100%, Washington is at least giving him the chance to get that usual workload. Taking us into the game predictions. So I had Washington plus 8.5 written down. I have changed my mind. Not so fast, my friend. I am now taking the under 45 after going through this with you, Dwayne, because again, everything the Buccaneers do good on defense is exactly what Washington wants to do. And you look at this Washington defense, okay, I mean, even if Brady performs a little bit better, I don't see an explosion coming by any stretch of the imagination. The Washington football team and the Ravens, the only defenses with 10 games holding their opponent to 20 or fewer points. Banged up Mike Evans. Again, Rojo with the finger thing, Brady and all these pressure concerns. I do question whether either offense can put up anything resembling anything close to 30 points in this one. Dwayne, what do you got?
Yeah, man, this one's a tough one, with the line, being bigger. I want to say that Washington, can cover just because of their defense, but I just think the onslaught all day of Tampa Bay and the lack of ability of the Washington offense is just going to be problematic. So I would say Tampa, to cover. that would be totally against, if you look at the PFF green line, they would absolutely say, take Washington. That's the value, to cover this game. And the Bucs are not a good value. So that's from people that are far smarter, than me, do a lot more math than me. But I'm just going to go against the math on this. And I would say that I think that the Bucs are going to win this game by double digits.
I can see it now. Buccaneers comfortably up 14. Final 3 minutes of the game, McKissick catches 9 straight checkdowns, finds his way into the end zone at the end. We will see. We will see. All right, opening up to Sunday now. We got the Ravens at the Titans. Baltimore sitting pretty as a 3.5-point favorite. Game total at 55. Look, this Ravens offense, it goes through Lamar Jackson and running the ball. Ravens have rushed for 100 yards in 39 consecutive regular season games since Lamar took over in Week 11, 2018. They're not going to have a chance to extend that in the playoffs, but the Steelers at 43 games from 1974 to 1977, only team to do it more often. So 14 players this year averaged at least 5 yards per carry among 51 guys with 100 rush attempts. 3 play for the Ravens, and Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, and Gus Edwards. So truly, they can run the ball on anybody. I'm not exactly expecting the Tennessee Titans to be much of an issue. And man, even looking at the passing attack, it's not that the Ravens have necessarily fixed everything. I know you can check out PFF.com. Seth Galina has a great article talking about, the different things Lamar Jackson has done to help get this team back on track, looking like his former self. And a lot of that is true, but I will say, when you face the Cowboys, Browns, Jaguars, Giants, and Bengals to end the year, the good parts of your game are probably going to shine through a little bit more than they would against, maybe tougher opponents. But with that said, I got my mismatch manifesto article coming out Wednesday, and just looking at the combined, EPA per pass play from these teams. Buffalo, with their pass offense versus Colts pass defense, is popping the most. Number 2, though, is the Ravens passing game. So it's not necessarily, saying that Lamar and them are playing that great, but truly everybody can pass on this Titans defense. They are maybe a bottom 5 secondary in the league, and they've been performing like it for the better part of the last 6 weeks. So, Baltimore, we'll get to DFS stuff a little bit later, but the run offense is great, but they might just be able to throw the ball to, something resembling their heart's desire in this matchup as well. Dwain, tell me about Tennessee Titans offense that they can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, man, they do it all. I mean, if you look at the teams that are actually positive in EPA per run and EPA per pass, they're one of the very few teams that are positive in both. So they're a positive EPA per run is 0.05, and then EPA per pass is 0.30, which is really high. They utilize a ton of play action. And if you look at the Ravens and really how they've built their team, they're very athletic, even at the linebacker spot. They've got great corners. They're hurting a little bit at safety after what happened, with Earl Thomas, but they're really built, to stop the passing game. Now they've been good, against the running game. They've been second in the league if you look at it, on a yards given up per game. But if you look at, the Ravens, after contact, what they're giving up, and you look at the way that Tennessee likes to play, 3.5 yards per carry after contact, that's number 1, in the NFL. They've got the number 1 graded, rushing attack in the NFL by PFF, 92.3. So I see this being a game where, to your point, it can be balanced, but I think they're going to run the ball plenty. I think they're going to run the ball unless they just were to fall down, by 2 scores all of a sudden, then they would need to throw the ball more. I see them trying to come out and run the ball half of these plays, right? And then go play action and hit big plays off of it. Our guy, AJ Brown, we'll talk about, the DFS stuff here in a second, but they've just got a perfect blend, of 2 just monsters with Derrick Henry. Then you got to worry about AJ Brown on the in routes and the crossing routes on play action, which is really hard to cover with the linebackers, biting up. And then you also have, Corey Davis is not bad. Jonnu Smith is also a decent, tight end. So there's just a lot of options, for the Titans. But I do expect them to stick with what's brought them here. They're going to run the ball a ton. They're going to go play action. They're going to try to hit their big plays.
I don't want to necessarily call the Titans the Ravens kryptonite, but man, if we get another victory from them, it's going to be 3 straight where it's looking just like that, because the biggest kind of issue with this Ravens defense, it's tackling. They were 26th in missed tackle rate, 30th in yards allowed after contact per carry. It's not even necessarily just in the front 7. I mean, this was the 6th worst defense in missed tackles and coverage this year too. So that is not good when you're facing Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, Jonnu Smith. I mean, if we just had an anchorman style brawl between every team's wide receiver 1, RB1, and tight end 1, the Titans would be like a minus 500 favorite. Like these guys are all monsters with the ball in their hands, and they're facing a secondary and truly it's a front seven that does have problems with always being, getting the first guy to take down that ball carrier. And then you look at what Corey Davis did in week 11, 7 targets, 5 catches, 113 yards. They just seem to have an answer for everything Baltimore wants to do to stop them. So no disrespect to Marlon Humphrey, Jimmy Smith, Marcus Peters. It's a great secondary. We've only really seen Patrick Mahomes have a really sustained success in the passing game, but you add Derrick Henry to this equation, it's no wonder we've seen the Ravens have so much trouble slowing down this Titans offense. So it's everything we were talking about, how Washington, Tampa Bay, and some of those Saturday matchups are kind of, nothing's working out for those offenses. Almost the opposite here. I feel like the Titans might have a chance to do whatever they want against this Ravens defense. Dwayne, do you feel the kind of the same way for the Ravens offense versus the Titans?
Yeah, I don't see a ton of reason to talk about the Titans offense very much. I mean, if you look at the PFF grades, 64.4, overall on defense, rush defense of 59.7, which is really bad. Tackling 62.9, pass rush 62.9. The coverage has been okay at 68.2, but whenever you don't have a pass rush, you can't stop the run. Overall, you're just going to be in for a long day. So, I mean, overall, we're looking at a middle of the pack defense. Once you've adjusted, for their opponents that have been played, but I just feel like there's just too many holes. I think the Ravens can they're going to be in a similar spot. They're going to be able to do what they want, and they have enough variation in the way that they can attack, and that you have to respect the run game, especially with Lamar Jackson. And that's enough that so this is where it's different, right, than what you see with the Seahawks. Because the Seahawks my dog just coughed whenever I said the Seahawks. So that's bad news. That's bad news for the Seahawks. So if you look at Tennessee, you look at the Ravens offense, where it's a little bit different than like what you have with Seattle, is just because they run the ball so much with Lamar, and you got to constantly pay attention to that. You don't have to have 3 really good wide receiver options, right? So for Seattle, it's harder because teams know they're going to drop back to pass. Yes, Russ can still scramble, but he's not near the threat that Lamar Jackson is. So they do things schematically that really just keep teams in a bind all the time. They're also really good on play action. I think schematically the best way to try to attack Lamar Jackson is you have to take away the middle of the field. Don't let him throw the crossing routes, especially the deep crossers. Force him to throw outside the hash marks. Make him try to hit those go routes. He's not good at it. And Marquise Brown and they just haven't had that. They just haven't had that down all year. If you look at the plays that have really worked for them, it's either been ad lib or it's been the crossers. It's the seam routes and the crossers to Mark Andrews. So you just got to try to take that away from the Titans. And this is a Bill Belichick tree kind of team, right? So you could come in and sell out to do one thing. And if I were the Titans, that's what I would do. I would say, okay, I'm going to try to stop the run, and I'm taking the middle of the field away. I'm going to give you one-on-one shots outside. Lamar Jackson, you have to hit him.
Yeah, and slight tangent, but can we please get Lamar Jackson a legit number 1 wide receiver? We've seen Baker get OBJ. We've seen Josh Allen get Stephon Diggs. Like I put a poll up on Twitter, like, hey, if we just clone Stephon Diggs, put him on the Bills and Ravens, who wins? And the amount of just slander on Lamar Jackson for his throwing ability, it's like, I get it. The guy is never going to be Andrew Luck from the pocket, but hey, let's maybe give him more than arguably the single worst wide receiver room in the league before we completely dismiss what he can.
Hey, I mean, no, I think it's a really good point. I know it's a tangent, but just like if you look at the Bills and you look at if you look at one of the routes that's the easiest way to really help your quarterbacks, it's the not the dig route, but I want to say Diggs because it's Stephon, Diggs, but it's Classic. The hitch route, right? You're given your quarterback a target that's not moving horizontally across the field, so they don't have to worry about the leading perspective of it. They just got to hit them right between the numbers. And so it's a receiver working back to the quarterback. And if you look at what that's done, for Josh Allen's been really better across the board, but that's been a huge, huge thing for him. So he's thrown, I think, 104 targets to hitch routes this year, and I want to say Diggs has ran like 59 of them, which is by far like the most in the league. It's like 20 above the next person. So you have a really good route runner. You're giving him the type of route that's easier to hit, right? It's less problematic as far as all the different variables you got to take into account, and the way you're reading the coverage and the way you got to lead the receiver. So I think there's really, to your point, I think there's a lot of truth to something like that. I think Marquise Brown gives you the vertical stretch the field element. He can definitely run the crossers and all those things, but he's not the kind of guy you're going to run on a lot of that underneath stuff. I mean, they schematically try to work screens and some different things to him, but he's just not where a guy like Diggs is. And I think it is huge. I think we've seen what it's done for Josh Allen.
Yeah, I would just like to see Marquise Brown as an offense's number 2, dare I say, number 3 wide receiver instead of pigeonholed in as an underqualified wide receiver 1. With that said, because he is the wide receiver 1 in this offense, these Lamar Jackson stacks continue to be viable, even though he is the most expensive quarterback at the position. I mean, look, Mark Andrews, only 5,200 this week. I mean, there's no other tight end you want. And when you consider that Andrews can really just be the number 1 Ravens wide receiver during any given week, or just, receiver, we don't need to designate these positions as much with someone like him. Again, very affordable to stack these guys. So I know it might have burnt some people in week 17. They had a good game, not a great game together. Andrews in particular was a letdown. Lamar and Mark Andrews stacks, even if you don't want to put Marquise Brown on there, certainly a viable way to start any roster construction. And then looking at the running back room, I mean, look, J.K. Dobbins led the way last week in terms of efficiency. He's been their best back. They're treating him as a starter. They know he's the RB1. Look, he had 13 carries. Gus Edwards had 12. Mark Ingram had 9. Throw out the fourth quarter. That's when Mark Ingram was getting his work. 13 for JK and 12 for Gus. Like, they love Gus Edwards, and they should. The guy does nothing except average over 5 yards per carry, as he's now done in the first 3 seasons of his career. So I'm not saying, Ingram's a part of this, but Gus certainly still is. And when you look at Dobbins sitting there at 6,600 and Gus down there at 4,400, I mean, we only need to go back about a month to that Ravens-Browns game to see Edwards, fall into the end zone a few times on his, handful of touches. So if you're trying to win one of these tournaments with 6 games, you're looking for something funky to happen, just realize Gus Edwards is a candidate to get double-digit touches. I'm fine with J.K. Dobbins as well. Again, fully expecting the Ravens to move the ball at will against this Titans defense. Just realize this is not, a one-man backfield, still very much a 2 RB situation. Dwain, who are you targeting in DFS, and why is it AJ Brown?
Yeah. Well, it's AJ Brown because we just have to say AJ Brown, right?
Every
I think
podcast.
There's a quota for how many times we have to say AJ Brown. I don't know if we're there yet, but just let me know. Yeah, man. AJ Brown has really been, I think he's just shown. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the matchup is. Does it hurt? Yeah, it can. It can take some away. But if you look at, the rest of the matchups this weekend, on the slate, I think AJ Brown still has to grade, at the very top of the guys you're going to be looking for. As far as the tight ends go, Jonnu Smith, very sneaky, right? Over the last 3 weeks, his routes have really been in the elite range for tight ends, 80%, 71%, 70%, 81%. His targets have been a little bit up and down, 2, 5, 7, 2. But if this gets into, if this is a game where there's a shootout, if the Ravens corners really do come to play, right, like we know they're capable of, and let's say they're able to do some things against Corey Davis and they're able to do some things against AJ Brown, then I think that's where Jonnu Smith could really come up. They've got a rookie in Patrick Queen. He's a good linebacker, but I think Jonnu Smith, is very athletic in his own right. He's also a veteran. He knows how all these things work. And, the Ravens, they're going to be so occupied with Derrick Henry, especially their linebackers and safeties. So I think that could be a potential mismatch. And I think they could potentially funnel a few more targets to Jonnu Smith, given how good that we know that the secondary can be for the Ravens. So he's a guy that I'm really targeting this weekend. And as far as tight ends go.
Like that call, particularly considering all those missed tackle issues we know the Ravens had. On the game prediction, I am taking the Titans plus 3.5. I was surprised to see that they weren't favored when I saw this, honestly. I understand the Ravens, I believe, have the single best point differential in the NFL. They know how to beat the crap out of a bad team. The Titans are not a bad team. Ryan Tannehill, he's really only had 2 stinkers this entire season. The Green Bay game, which everybody saw, and it's all fresh in our memory, and then the first Colts game. But even that, AJ Brown catches that 75-yard touchdown. We're talking about a completely different story potentially. So, I have more confidence in this Titans passing game than I do the Ravens. Maybe Lamar has turned around. Maybe he's back to 2019 form. But again, I can't get that Cowboys, Browns, Jaguars, Giants, Bengals stretch run to end the season out of my head. So give me the Titans. I think they should be favored plus 3.5. I don't have a great feel for who could win because it could certainly be the Ravens. But again, I just think the wrong team is favored. I think it should be closer to a pick 'em. Dwain, what do you think?
Yeah, against the spread, I'm going with the Titans, and I would also go with the over. I think this is and you mentioned it earlier, this is the other game. We already talked about the Bills and the Colts. I think this is the game where you've got a really good shot at hitting the over.
Yeah, we have been through the 2 top scoring games, and now we're back to some defensive slugfest. Bears at Saints. New Orleans open as 10.5-point favorites, down slightly to 10. Game total holding steady at 48. So this Bears offense does one thing great, and that is exist and let Dave Montgomery be anybody's idea of an above average too. If he's facing a bad defense, very good running back. So I don't like this, how like every conversation on Dave Montgomery needs to be about how we're fading him in 2021. Yes, like I agree with that. I will be fading Dave Montgomery. Montgomery, but give the guy a little respect. Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, those are the only guys with more broken tackles on carries than Montgomery. And it's a good thing that he was able to do that because, man, it's going to be tough against this Saints defense. I've been talking about how the Buccaneers and the, Bills and how kind of the difference between a truly bad or run defense can just be, who wants to actually put 8+ guys in the box to stop the run and who doesn't. Look, the Saints have been one of the league's top run defenses, and they do not put a bunch of guys in the box. They've actually been a bottom 5 defense in terms of the amount of runs they've faced with 8 defenders in the box. So, credit to Cameron Jordan, all those guys on the line of scrimmage, because they can truly take things over without devoting the extra resources to stop it. So, hey, Montgomery, I mentioned those broken tackle stats. It's not even just on raw volume too. Like, he is 4th among 51 backs with at least 100 attempts and forced missed tackles per rush. We're going to need to see all of that from him in this one because, Trubisky, he's been the worst quarterback in the league in PFF passing grade on passes thrown at least 20 yards downfield. Like, at this point in the year, I think it's tough to expect more out of this passing game. With that said, though, we've seen them, other than these Packers matchups, put up 30 points in every single game since Trubisky has gotten back from the bye. So I'm not saying the Bears are going to do nothing on offense, but they've been a team that wants to give the ball to Montgomery 20, 30 times, as many times as possible. They're facing defense that has been able to slow that down. So maybe we're seeing a point where Montgomery can't overcome this matchup. We did see, the Chiefs and there's another team just go crazy on the ground against the Saints. They're not, completely just unstoppable. They've gotten that 100-yard rusher streak they had going on forever. That's been taken care of. But again, cards are stacked certainly against this Bears offense, particularly Dave Montgomery. I am pessimistic about their overall ability to move this ball against the Saints defense that, again, is not only great against the run, but they do so without devoting too many extra resources to it. And that's why, again, when I did my most complete team breakdown, they are right there with the Rams as potentially the best defense in the league when you want to consider, pass defense, run defense, havoc, and the ability to tackle. Dwain, talk to me about a Drew Brees-led Saints offense that we're hoping will have Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara back come Sunday.
Yeah, man. Hopefully they have those two guys back because really, Kamara is really the engine, behind the offense just because he can do everything. And I know running backs don't matter, but he just opens up so many different things, because what he can do in the passing game, what he can do, in the running game. Chicago does have a good defense, right? So, it's going to be a game where it's going to be one of those things where every yard matters. You're going to have to be able to move the ball in every way that you can. And again, Michael Thomas being back would be really good, as well. If you look at the Bears defense, they've been good across the board, but if there is one area that's been kind of exposed over the last several weeks, it really is the secondary. So if you can have a guy like Thomas back, Emmanuel Sanders, he's a good player in his own right, so if you can have a situation where you've got, Jared Cook and Troutman, they're rotating right now, but then you also have Thomas and you have Emmanuel Sanders and you can really be balanced. I think that's what you need, for a Bears defense where it's not like it's not like they have an Achilles heel where you can say, oh, we have this one thing and we can beat them. You really need to be able to throw quite a few different things, against the Bears, to make it work. But if you look at, New Orleans and what they're good at being a really, balanced team. They're going to run the ball about 45% of the time. They're going to throw the ball 55%. That's pretty much what a balanced offense looks like in the NFL nowadays. And I think that's what they want to do. They want to use play action. They want to use a lot of underneath passing. They'll occasionally go for the big shot down the field, but they're not going to do a ton of that, with Drew Brees. So it is going to be key for them, to have those key underneath weapons. And I think that's why it's so important, where it may matter more to the Saints than some other teams. Because you need playmakers underneath just because the way Drew Brees plays, at this point in his career, right? You're not going to build that offense around throwing the ball down the field, to big bodied receivers, right? That just isn't the formula for them. So you need some guys that can get the yards after the catch, some guys that can make the tough catches. And I think you're going to need Michael Thomas against the Bears. I think the Bears, while they're a big dog, in this game, the thing I'll say real quick about Trubisky, he's much better against man than he is against zone, just like what we talked about with Josh Allen. And the Saints run a ton of man coverage. They run cover one on 27%, of their plays. You got teams like the Lions are at like 40%, the Cardinals are at 40%. So they're not, one of the highest in the league. But then whenever you factor in, how much, quarters coverage, which has a lot of man components to it, because a lot of times that's what we call match coverage, where it's just based off of, you're mirroring a guy, right? It's not just like a true zone play. So 20% of their plays come out of come out of that. And then you've got cover 2 man, 5%. That's one of the higher in the league. So overall, like the Saints are going to come out there and they're going to run man coverage plenty. And while they do have some good names in the secondary, they've been prone to get beat. And Allen Robinson, has been really good, down the stretch. He and Trubisky have found their stride. So I think this is a game where New Orleans could find themselves really, especially early in the game, needing their offense maybe more than what this line indicates.
Yeah, and to your point, it's not that they have, liabilities necessarily in the secondary, but, among 78 qualified corners, Janoris Jenkins, 44th, Marshawn Lattimore, 55th in yards allowed per cover snap. So we have seen guys beat them when they can get to those one-on-one matchups, avoid some of that pressure at the line of scrimmage. Looking at the Saints offense, though, I don't know if they're going to be able to push the ball downfield because that's not who they are. And it's not who they've been really for the entirety of Brees' tenure, but particularly more than ever this year. Only Nick Mullins had a lower deep ball rate than Drew Brees this year. Brees throws, fewer than 20 yards less often, or he throws more than 20 yards, less often than Alex Smith, then Cam Newton, then Jared Goff. All these guys that we like to make fun of that. Drew Brees is the king of that statistic. So you look at where the Bears are weak, and they have had some issues in the secondary, but, Brees, he is someone that we can actually say might have that noodle arm at this point in his career. We've seen this kind of rear its ugly head when they face the Vikings and teams are able to crowd that line of scrimmage. Can Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray, or maybe even Taysom Hill, create some big plays in the running game? Because this year, only the Texans, Cardinals, and Bengals allowed a higher explosive run play rate. And, we can talk about running backs not mattering. I think that's more of a salary cap thing. I think in the context of a football game, anybody that's getting 15 plus touches absolutely matters. Now, do you want to devote $90 million to a running back when you can get someone that gives you 90% of that ability, for much cheaper? Obviously that's a different conversation, but you look at Kamara, I think he is the right running back that can make big plays against a defense that we have seen consistently allow them to the running back position. So regular season, we know the Saints, automatic 10 wins, automatic like top 5, top 10 offense. In the postseason, though, that's when things get tougher. It's when they can't get downfield even less than they do normally. I think Alvin Kamara is going to need to be a difference maker. And honestly, like if he's not in that, it's going to be a little bit concerning for their chances. So here we are, PFF podcast, trying to break down the idea that running backs could matter in a playoff game. We'll see what the bosses think of that one. Dwain, what do you think about this Saints defense trying to slow down Trubisky? I know you've talked about it a little bit already. So just any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's the one thing that could really make this game closer than what we think. You did a good job of outlining, really where, the guys rank from a coverage perspective for the Saints. I think that Trubisky is one of these guys where if he can see the throw, right, and you're not really confusing him, and especially if he's not under pressure, that's where the Saints, the Saints can apply pressure to Trubisky. But if he has these simple reads that he can make and the coverage isn't great, that's what they need to stay in the game. So as far as like, if you want me to jump real quick while we're here, like because we'll go to the DFS plays next.
Go ahead.
I think Allen Robinson is definitely, in play. I'm not afraid of Allen Robinson at all. Even if Trubisky ends up having a bad game, we can still see 8-9 receptions, right, for Allen Robinson. He's pretty much, he's the workhorse for the offense. Yes, you've got Mooney who can help stretch the field. Yes, you've got Anthony Miller who comes out. Yes, Jimmy Graham only plays like a third of the snaps and still somehow gets 5 or 6 targets every single week. But I mean, the engine for this offense really is Allen Robinson. And I wouldn't be surprised, in man coverage, while your completion percentages are typically lower, the big play upside is higher because you're against one guy, right? And if they're in cover one and the safety shaded the other way for whatever reason, because of the way the route combination works out, and all of a sudden Allen Robinson makes, Marshawn Lattimore fall down, right, on his attempt to tackle him, he can break off a really long play. So I think, Robinson would be one of my top plays this weekend, as far as DFS goes. He's going to be chalky, pretty much anyway, but I have no problem with that.
Yep. Right next to Bears DFS thoughts on my notes, I had Allen Robinson can win here highlighted because mainly Marshawn Lattimore, they can get him free from this coverage. He's only spent 8% of his snaps in the slot this year. That's why, and that's why kind of a shadow stats. I prefer full game box scores versus, what did this guy do in his coverage? Because, you look at Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore, and Evans hasn't caught a pass against him this year. Well, I mean, he went for 64 yards in their second matchup. Why is that Mike Evans' fault if Marshawn Lattimore won't follow him into the slot and they just cover him with a linebacker or a safety? Because NFL defense is still in the year 2020 or 2021 now, still can't, figure out a better solution when a number one wide receiver moves inside. So Allen Robinson at 25%, I'm certainly confident that they can get him away away from that matchup if it's a problem, because I think Robinson can win anyway. So we'll see what they do there. Dave Montgomery has 6,900. I think just based on his touches, he should be up there a little bit closer to Jonathan Taylor, a full $1,000 more. I get the matchup, but hey, Montgomery, second most routes among all RBs this season. Even if you think the Saints are going to blow him out, we could get one of those weird 8-10 reception games for Dave Montgomery. He had 9 last week alone. So just realize that is in his range of outcomes. Quickly with the Saints in DFS, anything that's popping out to you? I know Breeze at 57 is pretty cheap, but man, it's playoff Breeze again. I feel like focusing on these running backs might be the better way to go.
I totally agree. I mean, I think Breeze gives you the contrarian play, and it is a weekend where if for some reason, here's what my logic would be like if I was going to play Breeze, and this is more game theory than all this matchup stuff we're talking about. If for some reason the Baltimore and Tennessee game just didn't explode, right, the way we think it did, then Breeze, he could come through for you, right? I don't expect him to throw for 300 or 400 yards, but Breeze is the type of quarterback that can throw. So he's not likely to get you your bonus that you want, especially on DK, but he could come through with 3 touchdown passes, right, on just 225 yards passing with, 2 of those coming from inside the 5. So, I mean, from a contrarian standpoint, I think Breeze, would be in play. But even then, I'm more likely to lean towards, if I want to get off of that Baltimore-Tennessee game from a quarterback perspective, I'm probably leaning honestly more even towards Trubisky, because I just think he gives me more upside as far as the big plays go. And he also gives me more rushing ability than what Breeze gives you. But that's what you would have to do to go to Breeze. It's really more of a contrarian play, and you're trying to get off of some of the chalk and you're trying to differentiate your lineup. That would be the reason for it. As far, and obviously the other component, whenever you look at Chicago, you've got Alvin Kamara. I mean, everybody's gonna, he's gonna be chalk, no matter what. But I think, how do you get away from it? I just don't know how. I mean, obviously it's going to be tough, but whenever you're making your lineups, because you're going to be looking at, I think Derrick Henry, right, is going to be the most preferred option, for the weekend. So if you're playing the 6-game slate, I think it's going to be tougher, because how are you going to own both of those guys? But if you're playing the 3-game slate, right, and you're just playing Sunday, Kamara is going to be in those lineups. So again, the only way you're going away from Kamara is you're just trying to be contrarian, and you're hoping that he busts, and basically 70% of you can hurdle 70% of the field from a game theory perspective by Alvin Kamara not coming through.
6-game slate, gun to your head. You can only have Henry or Kamara. Who is it?
Henry.
Yeah, I think you're right. On the game prediction, I like what you said about Trubisky potentially over Breeze, because I do think he does have the potential to put up points. We've seen him since he got back under center, 25 points, 30, 36, 33, 41, and 16. The guy has had legit 3 top 10 fantasy finishes this year. He's had plenty of finishes outside the top 20, believe me, but he is one of these quarterbacks that we at least know does get hot for stretches. So give me the over at just 47.5. I think this one's a little bit too low. We've been getting the under, so happy to be back on Team Cool right here. But you know what, Saints, they've been moving the ball even without Michael Thomas, and now hopefully getting Alvin Kamara back, that could change things. But mention that noodle arm for Breeze would be much more concerning if he wasn't playing from the friendly confines of the Superdome. So I think both offenses, particularly the Saints and underratedly the Bears, can't put up points in this spot. Give me the over. Dwayne, who you got?
Yeah, I agree. I think the over is the way that you have to go. PFF Greenline agrees with me on this one, so I won't get screamed at. I'm actually going with what our data says. The thing for me, if I had to choose as well on the spread, 10 points is a lot, man.
Yeah.
I would lean to Chicago just because as good of a team as New Orleans is, right? Breeze can still be problematic, right? It's not, and he's playing a good enough defense that they could force, some issues for him. And they have a good run defense. So, I mean, it's not like, you can just come out here and get 100 yards with Kamara on the ground. I see Kamara being a bigger threat, in the passing game in this particular matchup. And I don't think it's particularly a good matchup for Latavius Murray. So I think it's a situation where I like the over, and I think the game's going to be closer than where, we've got the spread at right now.
Yeah, Bears and the football team, I'm like, well, all these things are kind of adding up to take those points, but it just feels so icky doing so. But yeah, if I did have to pick,
it's the turnovers, man. If Trubisky turns the ball over, that's going to be the killer. The thing is, he hasn't turned the ball over that much against man coverage. Okay. Even when pressured. So that's the thing I'm kind of leaning into. And if you look, and that's not just this year thing, that's also historically, with Trubisky, whenever he's been able to play against man coverage, he's done really well. if you put him up against zone coverage and you mix things up, he's terrible. So that's really what I'm leaning into. But I think the big thing is the turnovers. People expect Trubisky to turn the ball over.
We're rooting for you, Mitch. Put up some points. Fook the haters. Last game. Thank you guys always for sticking with us here on the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. We got the Browns at the Steelers. Pittsburgh open as 3.5-point favorites, as up to -6, potentially influenced by the news that Coach Kevin Stefanski is on the COVID list and will not be available for this game. And also, all-world guard Joel Bitonio, who is PFF's number 6 ranked guard, will also be joining him on the sideline. Kadero Hodge, too, just not quite as big of an issue for Kadero. No offense to him. Best part of this Browns offense, even without Bitonio, though, is this offensive line. PFF's number 1 offensive line in both team run and pass block grade. Again, Bitonio, number 6 ranked guard. But look, we still got Jack Conklin, PFF's number 8 highest graded tackle, Wyatt Teller, the number 1 guard, and center JC Treader, who is number 4 ranked center. So, hey, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, these guys are special enough out there in the open field, but it's this offensive line that has been making things happen all season for this offense. And thank God they had them, man, because obviously every quarterback is going to be better unless you got, just a weird kind of small sample size when they're kept clean versus under pressure. Baker Mayfield, again, I keep going back to this list because we actually have a few qualified guys this weekend, Tom Brady and Jared Goff. Baker Mayfield is also on this list of just the most pressure sensitive quarterbacks in the league. He is 26th in PFF passing grade and 27th in yards per attempt when he's under pressure this year. When he's kept clean, he's 7th and 13th respectively. So Mayfield, we can go back there, make his reads, get the ball out before pressure. Things are great. Dude has a freaking rocket for an arm. We saw that 80-yard Hail Mary out the back of the end zone. There isn't a throw on the field that Baker Mayfield can't make. Just realize if the Steelers, just historically great pass rush, can do what they usually do, and that is make life hell for their opposing QB, could be a long night for Mayfield and his passing game. They're going to need this offensive line to instill their will. I would think on the ground, at a minimum, they need to try to keep that pass rush away from Baker because, again, that's when things go south from Baker, when he has to start trying to work outside the system. And without his coach there to potentially calm those nerves and put a better game plan in once they have to adjust, it is concerning to think how this Browns offense will be moving the ball. Dwain, Steelers, not Mason Rudolph. That was not the answer. We got Big Ben back. What are you thinking with this rematch?
Yeah, man, we know what the Steelers want to do. They want to throw the ball, and they want to throw the ball, and they want to throw the ball. And really, the way they look at their running game at this point, it's just the short passing game it's an extension, right? That's their running game, really. They could care less about running the ball. They're also not very good at it. Their run blocking is one of the worst in the league. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I want to say it's in the bottom 5. So it's not like it's something they can really do well. And neither Benny Snell nor James Conner has looked that great. So while Ben Roethlisberger's had his challenges, I think that is the way, right, for them to go. And I don't see them changing, anything this weekend. I think they'll fully run the offense through Ben. I think they'll throw the ball 65 to 70% of the time, unless they're just happen to get up, right, by 10, 14, 2 scores, right? They get up by 2 scores, they may dial things back, in the second half of the game. So I would expect, Ben to throw the ball plenty. Cleveland has been susceptible, in the secondary. So I think the big thing for me, with the Steelers is get the ball, to Chase Claypool more. He's actually their highest graded player by PFF right now on offense, but he's the guy that rotates in and out the most, right? Between Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and him. I mean, yeah, he has reasserted himself over James Washington. We had a couple of scary weeks there where all of a sudden James Washington was the guy getting to be out there more. But I mean, if you look at weeks 14, 15, 16, and 17, there's still more to be desired. I mean, 58% of the routes, 67% of the routes, 85% of the routes. That was week 16, which was really great. Week 17, obviously they rested guys, so you don't even really want to count it. He was out there for 52%, but he saw 11 targets this past week. He was the guy that got really more of the work. So Claypool's a guy that we need to see more of. And he's a guy that's pretty much, Ian, he's a mismatch almost against any corner, right? Really, because he can stretch the field vertically. He can win 50-50 balls. Is he the best, route runner? No, but he can still work underneath on crossing routes, and he's great after the catch. You see him trying to get him involved in the running game. I think they've just got to figure out ways to get Claypool the ball more often. But the offense is gonna fully run through Ben, and I wouldn't expect anything less than Ben to have 45 to 50 passing attempts this weekend.
Claypool's reached that like Metcalf territory where it's like, throw this guy the ball down the sideline at least 5 times a game, no matter what. Fun stat from PFF's own Anthony Triash: the most defensive pass interferences drawn on deep targets in a single season since 2014. Number 1 was 2014 Torrey Smith catching those long balls from Joe Flacco or drawing the pass interference. Number 2 with 7, Chase Claypool in 2020. Nobody else. Torrey Smith and Chase Claypool, most deep defensive pass interferences drawn. Thank you to PFF Anthony for that one. Looking at this Browns defense and what they're going to be able to do, it's the story of this game is going to be havoc, and it's a fun stat. Okay, we can just use havoc as a descriptor, but in college football, I've seen the stat thrown out and I've applied it to the playoff team. So havoc is your ranking tackles for a loss or no game, plus forced fumbles, plus interceptions, plus batted passes and deflections, plus pressures divided by plays. When are you causing havoc somewhere in this game? Number 1, Steelers by far, and surprisingly, the top 7 teams are all playoff teams, not the Browns. They're all the way down to number 21. Not an indictment on Myles Garrett. He is fantastic. Only Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, TJ Watt have a higher pass rush grade than Garrett. Also been fantastic against the run. The problem is we now have no Olivier Vernon, who's done for the season, I believe, with an Achilles injury. And look, this is the 4th worst defense in fewest tackles for a loss or no game, just 19th in total pressures. They struggle to create negative plays to put offenses behind the sticks. And against a Steelers team that all they want to do is consistently throw these short passes, maybe once in a while get a deep one and Chase Claypool. That's not good. That's something that we should be able to see Roethlisberger and company take care of if they can get back to being just that middle of the road offense. So, Browns, maybe they step it up in the playoffs, but now they're losing pieces of a front 7 that was already struggling to do exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So unless Myles Garrett goes freaking Super Saiyan on these guys, I am concerned about their ability to stop this short passing game if these Steelers receivers can't hold on to the ball and do what they do best, and that is pick up yards after the catch. So we'll see there. Dwain, Steelers defense, where do you attack these guys? Because it's hard to find a spot.
Yeah, I think, the cornerbacks are the most susceptible, spot, and they're not bad, but you want to stay away from the middle of the field because Minkah Fitzpatrick is really good. They've got a great pass rush. They play good against the run. If you look at their defensive ranking after being adjusted for opponent, they're number 2, according to PFF in the NFL. It's just a tough situation. You've got to be balanced, because you can't let them just tee off on you, because TJ Watt, Hayward, all these guys, they're all great, so it's if you look at their front 7, it's going to be, there's no way you have a game where there's not a mismatch or 2 that they gain, just because they have so many good guys up front, like even guys that a lot of people have never even heard of, like Chris Wormley. You got Cameron Hayward, Tyson Alualu, who was a former first-round pick, like however many years ago from the Jaguars. Like, he's the perfect fit for what they do. All of these guys, are grading in the high 80s and the low 90s, from a PFF grading perspective. If you look at the pass rush for TJ Watt, he's one of the best in the league. He grades out at a 90.4. So and here's the good news for the Browns, right? They have the kind of game plan that if they can, as long as their defense can do enough to keep them from falling behind, that they can keep the Steelers off balance, right? Because they have 2 really good running backs in Chubb and Kareem Hunt. They have a good offensive line. Yes, they're going to have issues like you mentioned this weekend. They're going to be missing some guys. But we've seen this type of offense, this type of scheme, be able to still run the ball even without elite linemen, right? We've seen it for years from Shanahan and Kubiak and some of these other guys, and that's where Stefanski, comes from. Now, I know he won't be on the sideline, but this is still firmly, this is his scheme. It's crazy, like how many landmines the Browns are having to try to overcome over the last 3 weeks of this season, and what is really their best season in a long time. It should be this really happy story for fans. Like, they've really had some misfortune with a lot of the COVID stuff and then the injuries. But for the Browns, I think the real key, Ian, it's not a situation where you can just say, hey, I'm going to go just attack this. I think you have to be balanced. You cannot let the Steelers get into a situation where they know all they have to do is pass rush Baker Mayfield, because, you mentioned some of the splits and everything earlier. That's a big problem. That's a recipe for disaster. So you got to be able to run the ball. You're not going to get some of the gains that you're used to, but Chubb and Hunt, they're good enough players. If you give them a crease, they can make more out of it. But I think the play action is really where it's at, against them. That's how you're going to have to set things up so that you can take some shots, on the crossing routes and some of the deeper routes down the field against some of these cornerbacks, which, they're good. But if you compare them to the other players, on their team, that's really going to be the best matchup that you're going to get.
Yeah, moving on to some DFS thoughts, and quickly to your point about just that pressure coming from everywhere. You are right, my friend. I mean, you look at just the top 8 guys this year in pressure, and the Steelers freaking have TJ Watt, number 3, Stephon Tuitt, number 4, and Cameron Hayward, who's tied for 7. So it's not just TJ Watt. They're getting that interior pressure coming right up the gut as well. And because of that, it's just hard for me to get behind this Browns offense, man. Again, the one kryptonite, I mean, for the passing game is particularly my issue, because the one kryptonite is pressure. Steelers do it better than anybody, and now the Browns amazing offensive line is going to be just a bit less amazing without Petonio in there. So I'm largely going to be fading this, Baker Mayfield in the passing game. Jarvis Landry, he's got 5 plus catches in 5 straight games. He has cemented himself as number 1 without OBJ in the picture. Some might even argue with OBJ in the picture. He was on his way to doing that, but that's a story for another day. So staying away from that passing game. And I would just say it's a little bit like, similar situation in the Colts, because you have Nick Chubb at 6,700, Kareem Hunt at 4,800. Obviously, Kareem Hunt, higher ceiling, or, should have a higher ceiling than Nyheim Hines with what a Hunt really brings to the table as just an early down back as well. But just ask yourself, where do you think this game is going to go when you're making these lineups? Because if you see the Browns winning, okay, then we probably going to see Nick Chubb, get his 15, 20 carries, find the end zone. But if we see them losing, like last week, Hunt literally outsnapped Chubb in negative game scripts. So I do think, Hunt sitting down there at 4,800, if you're looking at this spread, seeing the Steelers favored by a touchdown, Kareem Hunt is probably the preferred play over Nick Chubb if you expect that to play out. So, hey, weird things have happened. Nick Chubb, as we saw last week, can always take one 45, 50 yards to the house, just like that. And, just like you were saying earlier with the wide receiver getting loose, just takes one run to make us look like an idiot for talking about fading the guy. But I do think there's a potential chance to leverage away from Chubb to Kareem Hunt with this game expected to go the Steelers' way. Dwain, what Steelers pass catcher are we focused on? Because I know you're not going to tell me to focus on James Conner.
Yeah,
we haven't mentioned a Steelers running back in like 15 minutes, and nor should we.
Yeah. It's Deontay Johnson. I mean, if you just look at Deontay Johnson so it's the perfect storm, right? He's handling a lot of the short targets. Now Juju still gets his, but he sees more than Juju. It's an extension of the running game, but he can also still beat you deep. And we know that the Steelers are going to drop back and pass the ball a ton, so, I mean, just counting the number of times like that Deontay has had over 10 targets, this season, I'm not going to bore everyone and do it, but I mean, it's all the time. If you just look over the last several games, he's got 7, 11, and 14, and we can throw last week out, right? We know that was basically a lot of backups in the game, even though he was out there for 90% of the routes. You didn't have Roethlisberger. So, I mean, more often than not, this guy's seeing 10 targets, and at $6,200, I mean, that's just too low, in my opinion. Deontay Johnson is a receiver that really deserves to be priced like more up around the 7K, especially on a smaller slate, like this. If you're playing a 3-game or playing a 6-person slate, and he's going to be really popular, but his salary is so good, right? It's really going to be hard to not have Deontay Johnson, in your lineups, because he can typically pay off on that price point.
Yeah, I'm already on record. 2021 Deontay Johnson is 2020 Calvin Ridley, who was 2019 Chris Godwin. You heard it here first, everybody. Now for the game predictions, I'm going to again be a loser and take under 47 here. Far too many concerns with Baker versus the pressure. And look, Big Ben, the Steelers offense, while I see a path to victory, against a banged up Browns front seven, I mean, we have seen 2 quarters of the offense looking good over the past really 4 games that Ben's been under center. I mean, even looking past that, 19 points against the Ravens, 17 against the football team, 15 against the Bills, 17 against the Bengals. And then finally, Ben, say he took over play calling in the second half, puts up 28 against the Colts. So even if we get that performance out of him, I think expecting, a similar, just high scoring output from Baker Mayfield and company, asking just a little bit too much. So give me under 47. I think these lines are a little bit inflated on the total. We'll see how right I am on that next week. But Dwain, what are you feeling here?
Yeah, if I had to pick, I would go with the over, but it's not like a bet that I love, right? I don't like the under. I don't like the over. Like, if I had to pick one thing about this game that I liked the most, it's probably taking the line. I would take, Cleveland and the points, just because the Steelers offense has shown that it can just come out and just tank. I mean, if you look at their offense adjusted right for their opponents, they rank number 32 by PFF. So, I mean, they can really have problems, and we've seen them do it against even some bad defenses, right? I mean, it started all the way back with the Cowboys, in the middle of the season, and all of a sudden it's just carried through. Now, yes, they were able to just magically turn it on, and they were able to put up all those points against Indy to make that great comeback the week before. But outside of that, I mean, really, when's the last time we've seen this offense really play well? Is there going to be volume for the receivers? Yes. But are there going to be a ton of touchdowns, from this team? I don't know. I don't think you can be real confident about that. I think that teams know what Pittsburgh wants to do. There's no element of surprise in what they do. And I think that just makes them really vanilla, no matter how bad the defense is that they're facing. If you're predictable in the NFL, the guys on the other side of the ball, they're still pros, right? There's only so many of us on this planet that can be pros. That means you're really good, right? So I think it's just a problem. I think Randy Fichtner's a problem. I don't know. Maybe this is just what Ben wants to do, and that's why they're doing it. But I hate their scheme. Like, I literally hate it. I have no problem with throwing the ball a lot. I just, they don't use play action at all. They don't use a lot of things that really create, advantages for their offense. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of underneath stuff. The opposing team can just sit on it. And so that makes me just, a little bit leery, right, of saying, okay, yeah, I think the Steelers can come out here, and really cover the 6 points.
6 points is a lot, Dwain. I think you have swayed me here. If I could retroactively go back, I do like the Browns +6. That's a good explanation by yourself. That's going to do it, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be back on Friday with 10 questions with the Ringers, Danny Kelly, and then back next week as well with some more game previews. But before you get to those, please go follow my friend Dwain on Twitter at Dwain McFarland. You see him on Twitter as Context Matters, because guess what? Context does matter in everything in life, particularly fantasy and real life football. Dwain, you got anything on the docket this week, or are you just kind of podding, keeping it loose after a 17-week grind?
Yeah, dude, I'm keeping things pretty loose, but we're going to have tonight on the Fantasy Football Hustle, we're going to have the two-time back-to-back champs of the Football Guys Players Championship, which is a 10,800 man tournament. He's won it 2 years in a row. He's finished first. So he's got $750K in his pocket, and we really want to know how he's doing that. So if you want to hear more about that, you guys like some of the high-stakes season-long type stuff, we'll have that on the Fantasy Football Hustle tonight.
Always great stuff from Dwain and Brian Drake on the Fantasy Football Hustle. You can check out that podcast at FF Hustle on Twitter. That'll be a great conversation for sure. That's going to do it, everybody. Thank you again for listening to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. He's Dwain. I'm Ian. Hope you have a great rest of your wild card week. And until next time, take care, everybody.